Most people believe global debt is created when someone borrows money, a government issues bonds, a household signs a mortgage, a company takes a loan, and money appears to move from one place to another. On the surface, the story feels complete. One side provides funds, the other side promises repayment, documents are signed, balances change, and obligations appear. Debt looks like a transaction, clean and contained. That belief feels reasonable because it matches what can be seen. But it leaves something essential out. In modern financial systems, borrowing is not the beginning. It is only the visible moment. Debt does not start when someone asks for money. It starts earlier, before any request is made. It starts with permission. And the more important question is not who borrows, but who is allowed to create claims on the future. To understand this, distance matters. Not emotional distance, but structural distance. This is not a story about markets rising or falling, and not a reaction to headlines. It is a story about coordination. Every organized society has faced the same underlying problem: how to exchange value over time. Immediate exchange is simple. An object is traded for another object. Both sides walk away complete. Delayed exchange is different. Work is done now, payment arrives later. Goods are delivered today, compensation follows in the future. This requires memory. Early societies solved this problem with records, marks on stone, clay tablets, knotted cords, handwritten ledgers. In these systems, the record mattered more than the object. The record allowed obligations to exist beyond the moment of exchange. Once obligations could be recorded, they could also be transferred. A promise no longer belonged only to two individuals. It became portable. This is where systems began to form. As trade expanded, personal trust stopped scaling. No one could personally know everyone else. So institutions emerged, not to create wealth, but to standardize promises. They defined units, timing, and settlement. They reduced friction by replacing personal trust with structural trust. This becomes important later. At first, promises were backed by physical goods such as grain, metal, or livestock. Over time, they were backed by authority, by temples, rulers, and states. Eventually, the backing became abstract. What mattered was no longer what stood behind the promise, but whether the promise was accepted. Acceptance replaced substance. This shift did not happen suddenly or by design. It happened because it worked, and systems that work tend to persist. Global debt is not created by accident. It is created by structure. Most people imagine banks as intermediaries, institutions that take deposits from savers and lend them to borrowers. This model feels intuitive and safe, but it is incomplete. In modern systems, banks do not lend pre-existing money. They create new money when they issue loans. This is not metaphorical. It is accounting. When a bank approves a loan, two entries appear at the same time. On one side of the balance sheet, an asset is created, the loan. On the other side, a liability appears, the deposit. The borrower receives spendable money. The bank receives a claim. Nothing is transferred from someone else. No prior deposit is required. Money and debt are created together. This is where the system changes. Debt is not the consequence of money. Money is the consequence of debt. This becomes important later. Because of this structure, money is temporary by design. When a loan is repaid, both the debt and the money disappear. The system therefore depends on continuous renewal. As loans are repaid, new loans must replace them to keep money circulating. Now scale this logic outward. Households borrow, companies borrow, institutions borrow. Each loan expands balance sheets. Each repayment contracts them. The system prefers expansion because contraction reduces liquidity, and liquidity is coordination. Coordination keeps markets functioning. Incentives therefore align toward renewal rather than resolution. At the institutional level, debt instruments themselves become assets. They are traded, pledged, reused, and layered. Their value does not come from eventual repayment, but from acceptability within the system. This is why debt instruments can circulate for decades without being extinguished. They are not designed to end, they are designed to function. That assumption does not survive stress, but under stable conditions, it holds. Now consider sovereign debt. States issue bonds, but these bonds are not merely funding tools, they are the backbone of the financial system. Banks hold them to satisfy requirements. Funds use them as collateral. Central institutions accept them in exchange for liquidity. They anchor trust. Sovereign debt is treated as foundational, not because it is riskless but because the system is built around it. This structural privilege allows sovereign debt to exist indefinitely, not paid down, but rolled, reissued, and refinanced. The system does not expect resolution. It expects continuity. This becomes important later. At the global level, these layers connect. Banks hold sovereign debt from multiple states. States rely on banks to distribute and price that debt. Central institutions stabilize both through liquidity operations. No single entity controls this process. No conspiracy is required. The incentives are sufficient. Expansion is rewarded. Stability is preserved. Resolution is deferred. Global debt grows because the system is built to carry it forward. Not because anyone lost control, but because control was never the objective. In the modern era, Global debt exists mostly as infrastructure. It is not a countdown and not a timer. It is a condition. Most debt is never meant to be extinguished. It is meant to circulate, to be serviced, renewed, and repriced. Markets are built around this assumption. Instruments are valued by liquidity. Liquidity depends on acceptance. Acceptance depends on institutional continuity. This is why debt can expand quietly. It integrates into balance sheets, portfolios, and settlement systems. It becomes background, like power lines or plumbing, invisible until strained. When strain appears, it does not announce itself. It shows up as hesitation, as repricing, as reluctance, as subtle changes in behavior. This is where the system adapts. Rules adjust. Facilities expand. Definitions shift. Not to solve debt, but to preserve coordination. This is not failure, it is a function. The system prioritizes continuity over closure. That is its logic. That assumption becomes fragile only when alignment breaks, when promises stop being interchangeable, when acceptance becomes conditional. This becomes important later. If global debt is created by permission rather than scarcity, then its limits are not numerical. They are institutional. They emerge when trust, coordination, and acceptance diverge. These limits do not produce sudden endings. They produce quiet transitions. The system reconfigures. Some instruments gain priority, others lose it. Some promises remain liquid, others do not. The critical question is not how much debt exists, but who absorbs friction when promises stop aligning perfectly, because global debt does not collapse. It reallocates pressure. And the mechanism that decides where that pressure goes is not debt itself. It is the structure that validates it. That structure operates above the balance sheet. And understanding it requires another step back. That is where the story continues.